When most people think about the global economy, they think about stock markets, banks, technology companies, real estate, and international trade. They think about the industries that create jobs, generate wealth, and help societies grow. But beneath the visible economy exists another world, one that rarely appears in economic reports or political speeches. It is a hidden economy worth billions of dollars every year. It operates across borders, uses sophisticated financial networks, and exploits some of the most vulnerable people on Earth. This is the human trafficking economy, and understanding it requires looking at incentives, money flows, and systemic weaknesses. If you want to understand how any system functions, you must follow the incentives. Human trafficking persists not because society approves of it, but because powerful economic incentives allow it to survive. Wherever there is enormous profit combined with low risk and weak enforcement, illegal markets tend to grow. Human trafficking is one of the clearest examples of this principle. The first thing to understand is that human trafficking is not simply a criminal issue. It is also an economic issue. Criminal organizations do not operate differently from businesses. In one important respect, they respond to incentives. They seek high returns on investment, predictable cash flow, and scalable operations. Unlike drugs or weapons, human beings can be exploited repeatedly. A drug can only be sold once. A weapon can only be sold once. But a trafficked person can be exploited again and again over months or years. From the perspective of a criminal organization, this creates a disturbing business model with recurring revenue. The economics of this reality help explain why trafficking remains one of the fastest-growing forms of organized crime around the world. When economists study markets, they often focus on supply and demand. Human trafficking follows the same basic pattern. On the supply side, poverty, instability, corruption, conflict, and lack of opportunity create vulnerable populations. People searching for better lives become susceptible to false promises. A recruiter may offer a job abroad, education opportunities, or financial security. Families facing economic hardship may feel they have no alternative but to trust these promises. On the demand side, there are industries, individuals, and criminal networks willing to exploit vulnerable labor or vulnerable people for profit. When supply and demand meet under conditions of weak enforcement, illegal markets emerge. One of the biggest misconceptions is that trafficking only occurs in poor countries. In reality, trafficking is deeply connected to wealthier economies as well. Globalization has connected labor markets across continents. Products consumed in wealthy countries often pass through complex supply chains involving multiple subcontractors and labor providers. Most companies operate legally and ethically, but complex supply chains create opportunities for abuse. The farther a company is from direct oversight of workers, the harder it becomes to monitor every link in the chain. Criminal actors understand this. They exploit complexity because complexity creates cover. Technology has also transformed the economics of trafficking. Decades ago, criminal organizations depended on local networks and physical interactions. Today, digital platforms allow recruiters to reach vulnerable individuals almost instantly. Social media, encrypted communication, online advertisements, and digital payment systems have lowered operational costs. In economic terms, technology has increased efficiency. Unfortunately, efficiency benefits both legal and illegal markets. The same technological forces that help businesses expand globally can also help criminal organizations expand their reach. Another factor is migration. Throughout history, people have moved in search of safety and opportunity. Migration itself is not the problem. In fact, migration has contributed enormously to economic growth throughout the world. However, large migration flows often create opportunities for exploitation. Individuals traveling through unfamiliar environments may lack legal protections, language skills, financial resources, or social networks. Criminal groups understand these vulnerabilities. They position themselves as helpers, recruiters, employers, or facilitators, while actually creating systems of control and exploitation. The financial side of trafficking is equally important. Every major criminal enterprise depends on moving money. Profits generated through illegal activities must eventually enter the financial system. This process, commonly known as money laundering, allows criminal organizations to disguise the origins of funds. Over the years, financial institutions, regulators, and governments have invested heavily in anti-money laundering efforts. Yet the challenge remains enormous. Criminal networks constantly adapt. They use shell companies, cash-intensive businesses, international transfers, cryptocurrencies, and complex ownership structures to obscure financial trails. One reason trafficking persists is that the risk-reward ratio often favors criminals. Imagine a simple economic calculation. If the expected profits are extremely high and the probability of detection remains relatively low, rational actors operating outside legal constraints will continue entering the market. This is not a moral statement. It is an economic observation. To reduce trafficking, societies must change this calculation. They must increase the likelihood of detection, increase penalties, and reduce opportunities for profit. In economic language, they must alter incentives. Corruption plays a critical role in this system. Corruption functions like a hidden tax on justice. When officials can be bribed, laws become less effective. Criminal organizations often invest heavily in corruption because it protects their operations. From their perspective, bribery can be viewed as a business expense. If a small payment significantly reduces the risk of enforcement, the return on that investment may be enormous. This is why anti-corruption efforts are often inseparable from anti-trafficking efforts. Weak institutions create fertile ground for exploitation. Economic inequality is another factor worth examining. Extreme inequality does not automatically cause trafficking, but it increases vulnerability. When large segments of the population feel excluded from economic opportunity, desperation grows. Desperation changes decision-making. People become more willing to accept risky offers when they perceive few alternatives. This is why long-term solutions require more than policing. They require expanding opportunity, improving education, strengthening labor protections, and creating pathways for economic mobility. History offers important lessons. Throughout history, exploitative labor systems have emerged whenever demand for cheap labor intersects with weak protections. The forms may change, but the underlying economic logic often remains remarkably similar. Whether we examine ancient societies, colonial systems, or modern forms of exploitation, the same pattern appears repeatedly. Individuals with power seek to maximize economic gain. Without strong institutions and legal protections, vulnerable populations bear the cost. One of the most important questions is why public awareness often lags behind reality. Part of the answer lies in visibility. Financial markets provide daily updates. Economic indicators appear in headlines. Corporate earnings are reported quarterly. Human trafficking, by contrast, operates in secrecy. Victims are often isolated, hidden, or controlled. The absence of visibility creates a perception that the problem is smaller than it actually is. Economists sometimes describe this as an information problem. When information is limited, markets and policymakers struggle to respond effectively. The role of consumers is also complex. Most consumers have no intention of supporting exploitation. However, modern supply chains are extraordinarily complicated. A single product may involve materials, labor, transportation, processing, and distribution across multiple countries. This complexity makes transparency difficult. As a result, companies face increasing pressure to improve supply chain visibility and accountability. Investors are paying greater attention to environmental, social, and governance factors, because long-term value increasingly depends on trust and reputation. From an investment perspective, institutional quality matters enormously. Countries with strong legal systems, transparent governance, and effective enforcement tend to attract greater investment over time. Investors seek predictability. They seek environments where contracts are enforced and laws are applied consistently. Human trafficking, corruption, and organized crime undermine these conditions. Therefore, addressing trafficking is not only a humanitarian priority, it is also an economic priority that influences long-term development and investment outcomes. The rise of artificial intelligence may create both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, AI can help identify suspicious financial transactions, detect patterns across large datasets, and improve law enforcement capabilities. On the other hand, criminal organizations may use advanced technologies to become more sophisticated. Throughout history, technology has generally been neutral. Its impact depends on how humans choose to use it. The race between enforcement and criminal adaptation is likely to continue. Governments around the world have made significant progress in recent years. International cooperation has improved. Public awareness has increased. Criminal networks are highly adaptive. When one route closes, another opens. This adaptability resembles competition in legitimate markets. Successful organizations evolve in response to changing conditions. Criminal organizations are no different. The broader lesson extends beyond trafficking itself. Every major social problem contains an economic dimension. Understanding incentives does not excuse harmful behavior. Instead, it helps explain why certain behaviors persist despite widespread opposition. If policymakers focus only on symptoms while ignoring incentives, solutions often fail. Durable solutions require changing the underlying economic structures that support harmful activities. Many people assume that economic growth alone will solve these issues. Growth certainly helps by creating jobs and expanding opportunity. However, growth without strong institutions can produce uneven outcomes. Wealth may increase while exploitation persists. Therefore, the quality of growth matters as much as the quantity. Sustainable prosperity depends on institutions that distribute opportunity broadly and protect individual rights effectively. As we look ahead, the fight against trafficking will likely become increasingly financial. Following money trails may prove more effective than focusing exclusively on individual actors. Financial intelligence allows investigators to identify networks, map relationships, and disrupt operations at scale. Criminal enterprises survive because they generate profit. Remove the profit, and the enterprise becomes less attractive. Ultimately, the human trafficking economy reveals an uncomfortable truth about how systems work. Markets are powerful mechanisms. They allocate resources, create innovation, and improve living standards. But markets are not inherently moral. They respond to incentives. Without rules, transparency, and accountability, markets can produce outcomes that society finds unacceptable. The responsibility of governments, institutions, businesses, and citizens is to shape incentives in ways that align economic activity with human values. The story of human trafficking is not simply a story about crime. It is a story about incentives, institutions, opportunity, and accountability. It is a story about what happens when profit becomes disconnected from ethics, and it is a reminder that economic systems, no matter how sophisticated, ultimately reflect the choices societies make. If we want a different outcome, we must create different incentives. History shows that systems can change, markets can evolve, institutions can improve, but meaningful change begins with understanding the forces that drive behavior in the first place. When we follow the money, we often discover the real story. And in the case of the billion-dollar human trafficking economy, that story is one the world can no longer afford to ignore.